Hello, hello.
Hello. I
How
just
is everyone
realized
doing?
my camera, I deleted the device from my system the other day. That's because
Best
one of my
move.
apps, one of my apps defers to this camera if it's on, so and I can't get it to use the other one, but I don't have the other one. So I'm gonna restart my computer. I'll be right
Cool.
back.
See you soon. I am just trying to get the right thread to reply to you. There it is. All right. Sorry about that. I was just getting things organized on my computer. How's everyone doing?
Good. Good.
Yeah, good. Cool. So today our goal is to iron out what we can about the document that's called Table Deep Dive, and is the intention here. Let me screen share so that we're all looking at the same stuff. I think that's what I want to share. So this document has some context at the top, and it has an additional column here for usefulness for review. But the idea is that the rest of this table, other than this one column in the middle here, will replace the table on our maturity model document that has been crossed out. So if we get comfortable with it today, where we feel like that's a good idea, that's what we're marching towards, with the added bonus goal of, if we get comfortable with that table today, it'd be great to find people who wanted to sort of corral and start getting the descriptions and detailed sections going for the different rows of the table. So my gut feel is that we should divide the kind of leadership or writing of the kind of detailed section by row, more so than by either column or by cell on the table. But that's also open for debate if we get there. So yeah, so is that what people expected? That cool with people if we go through that?
That's awesome.
Awesome. I have been
One
happily
thing, Abby,
surprised. Yeah, go on, Josh.
I was just gonna say one thing we did with the first paper was, once we created an issue for like each of the items in GitHub to track. You might be ready to do that.
That is a really good point. I think that's so. I was sort of waiting for when we got to like the more formal review period, that kind of final month of like GitHub review. But I think you're right that this is now like divide and conquer kind of workloads, and we can possibly start getting kind of smaller groups of people together to do it. So I will make a note to myself to do that. There it is. Cool. Any other suggestions or ideas or questions or anything? Cool. Awesome. Items. Okay. Then what I was gonna just say is that, like, I'm really happily surprised that people seem like this is in the right direction. That doesn't mean that it doesn't have question marks on it. So I don't have any indication of like something we should dive into. As I say, there's been little questions here and there, but nothing where I'm like, oh, this is a big problem, we need to talk about this today. So I'm going to just do a like open facilitation until it seems like we need more active anything, if we ever need more active anything. So I would say if there's anything on this table that you either want to add, edit, or delete for any reason, or discuss even just for more clarity, we can we can start going. So raise your hand, give a shout, whatever.
So one of the question that I have as at least as a row, not as a column, but maybe
Mhm.
column, which is platform extensibility.
Okay.
And if the given platforms are already being in a certain maturity state, how are we going to think through on the model of maturity in the extension aspects of it? So is it being covered in any of these columns in the context?
One thing I'm gonna try and do is not try and answer quickly anything, because what I have in my head may not be shared, because I feel like I've been the most deeply kind of reviewing this stuff. So I'm gonna leave space intentionally for other people to try and answer their opinions, and then I can reconcile if like I have a different opinion, or if I see us going in a different way or whatever. But like that way it'll start to hopefully validate that this is not just in my head, but it's in kind of our heads. So I don't know if anyone else feels like they can answer whether or not they see the extensibility of a more mature platform somewhere in this or not. Maybe VJ, if you have an example, a concrete example. So like
Yeah.
a platform that is currently doing X and
Yeah,
extensibility in the direction of Y, like what that would look like.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to, if at all the point that you selected, right? Upgrades and end of the life, those two are valid. And the another word that I use are extensibility. That is also I will add in there. For example, right? And assuming that we are using logging as a service, as a platform that we built and integrated with an IDP.
Mhm.
That product is being successful, it is being used, and then now industry came up with an using different tooling altogether, but the same concept. So what happens is that you have to extend the platform to support the more models, and the extensibility comes as a natural progression of the successful maturity model. So that's where I see that word should be there in the section of enhancements. Yeah. Now it covers everything. It covering extension, it also covering the end of the life, it also covering the upgrade. Yeah, good.
Okay. And so I've added that just to try and capture what you're saying. I don't know how people feel about that.
But you understand the context, right? Mainly that when we have a successful product, we're trying to add more features to it. And the way how sometimes we even have to extend it to make sure that it extends to the level that it can scale.
Yep.
That makes sense. I hear that, like the ongoing maintenance and support of a platform is both making sure the current capabilities function as they're supposed to and adding the ones that you discover that are missing. So that, yeah, that does.
Yeah, thank you.
Like that.
So I think an interesting thing I hear in your summary of that, Josh, is like, and I think this is where you were going with this, VJ, as well, but maybe I hear wrong, is like we've come to calling upgrades and updates uppies in my team, because it's like they are different, right? You're upgrading a version, but you're updating how something works, possibly, depending on like there's different ways it's there. And so we've mentioned here upgrades in the original wording, but not anything to do with updates. And I was sort of like, oh, maybe that can cover both cases. And the use of the term extensions indicates, as you say, like a new capability, almost like something additional. And that that feels slightly tangential to me to like the word, the column word, like in level 2 centrally tracked and level 3 centralized fleet management. I think both of those speak heavily to the idea of like upgrading from version 12 to version 13 of something, right? Like that's something that you manage the fleet on, or that you track the progress of upgrades on, versus like we need to introduce a capability around blah, right? Like that isn't something that you would fleet manage, right? That's not something that's already, you know, been offered as a part of the platform and therefore, and now needs to evolve with patching and upgrades and things like that. So it leads me to think that extensions maybe doesn't fit in the current way this column, this row is written with level 2 and level 3. So we have a couple options. We can either look at rewording levels 2 and 3 to make those a bit more like able to manage that use case of extent of like new capabilities, or we can try and see, does new capabilities fall into a different existing row, or maybe it needs to be its own new row that we don't currently have. But I'm not sure if that makes any sense to anybody else, but that's one thing that I'm concerned about. So it's definitely a capability we need to have, right? It's something that you need to be able to do. So it should be captured somewhere. It's just where is the question, basically.
Yeah, before I'll just take 1 minute and I'll pass on to others to share the thoughts. And if at all I have to take that, and I don't want to change anything, the naming aspect of it, maybe I can add even other row calling as extensibility, not like extensions. I call this an extensibility. And that becomes a model that any of the platform that you built, and do you have the capability of extending your platforms to other things, integrations, and maybe that another aspect. In case if you don't want, if we feel like changing, will changing few words and the middle call table will make a big shift in the meaning. Having the new row by itself, that gives you the future of the platform's extensibility. Because that's what most of the companies and in general in the real world, if I have to do this maturity model and adapt to my teams, the thing like what I go and look for is that how it is going to be extendable to the things that what I'm trying to do in future.
Yeah, I like the addition of extensibility. I hear what Abby's saying, that row kind of doesn't, at the current moment, it's a little extra. Looking at kind of the stuff on the right, though, the 4 levels, is it almost the same? Like the way that you maintain existing features and the way that you allow other teams to influence new features, like would that also progress to the same thing? At first they request it from you, maybe then you have a list, maybe then they can contribute to it. Yeah, I'm wondering if, I'm kind of not sure whether to somehow make the support line more like maintenance, include everything, or have a second one.
I think I also have similar thoughts on these lines. Sorry, Atul here, I'm joining in for the first time. However, I've looked into the document a couple of times, left a few comments. So I think this extensibility thing, again, my point of view would be, since I mentioned that, there could be some way where we could track how the platforms are built, basically how organizations go from a level 1 provisional to an operationalized. So let's say a platform is built in that particular way. So extensibility could probably fit in, let's say, at a level 3 or a level 4, where where as a company, I start with a platform which is extremely basic and just does some functionality. But by the time they reach, let's say, the operational or a scale level, then it has options to extend, meaning, it could probably work with different products, or, it could have a lot more plugins, or internal teams could as well, develop and extend that. Probably. So that could be a way, because I do feel that if we have a separate row for this, what might happen is that we'll have to figure out each of these levels as to how a company would progress from one level to another, especially only from the extensibility point of view.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I just added coverage. I just want to make it visual what I'm hearing, and like, so therefore hopefully other people can validate their own hearing about like, wait, that's not what I heard. And I find that writing things visually always helps with that. So this is not that I'm suggesting this is like what we're gonna do. That's why I'm doing it in suggestion mode, but I just want to give you be verbal about why what you're seeing on your screen. But yes, I've added coverage because we talked about that at one point. I think, Josh, you mentioned like, I think you had capability coverage or capabilities or something to that effect. And I think that that's what I'm hearing again, being like, just raised as, hey, like there is a level of maturity around how much can you do with this platform? Like how valuable is it to you? How extensive is it to you? I want to ask one question around extensibility and the idea of like something is able to be extended, like and it does get extended, and how does it get extended? As I wonder if that fits at all under investment when we start getting into the details. Remember, this is like the one word shot, and there's going to be a detailed section. But the idea that like right now we've invested in a platform which can manage databases and logging, and there's been an ask that it can also manage and support queuing, making up things, but like queuing. The decision around, does that get supported, does that get implemented, could in some ways fit under investment, but then how that gets implemented and how that gets supported would maybe be around like the
Interface, maybe.
yeah, maybe another one. I don't know. So I just wanted to like raise, like, I think there's a piece of this that is, do you have the time and money to extend this thing? And then there's another piece of this, which is it technically built in a way that can be extended? And I don't think that's what you're poking at, but maybe it is. And if it is, then I don't think we capture it. And if it's not, then yeah, so.
So I think you got up the right point, and what my intention behind is that exactly I just texted there. The 4 columns, if I had to write it for extensibility,
Yep.
I say like, hey, it's closed, you cannot extend it. It's limited extension that you can do. And plugins and open APIs, you can easily integrate, and then full developer ecosystem, anyone can adopt it. So that's how I was visualizing. I'm picking for the right words, actually.
Yeah.
And to your point, AB, I think the extensibility extensions in the support section fit better in the interface than in the investment is how I feel. Because inherently interface kind of maps with what Vijay was saying about, close versus API versus complete, developer ecosystem sort of.
And so are you saying, Vishal, that like the combination, if we write descriptions well, the combination of investment and interface would, in your experience, kind of, and in your use cases, kind of cover that idea of, is this thing extensible? Or how does this thing get extended? It gets extended by investment that is voluntary or temporary, or it gets invested in by a product budget, and then it gets actually implemented by either a bespoke process or like a newly written self-service solution, which I'm trying to use those words in sentences because I think that that's how my brain like validates things. And as I'm saying that out loud, I'm thinking to myself that I really like the phrasing you came up with, VJ, around like closed limited ecosystem style thing. And I don't think those capture it. The things I was saying out loud about investment and interface. I think that is a slightly different mechanism. And it is like closer to what we're talking about in support, but it still might be independent of it. Like it feels like it might be independent. What about other people? How do people feel about this?
Yeah, I think I like where the conversation is going. I think extensibility, in my opinion, is a bit tricky. It kind of goes like what I've liked about at least the words that we have right now is that it doesn't like force, like if you like an organization, if you don't have like all of you, for example, like user wise, right? It may not be useful for a platform to have everybody in the company or every engineer be able to contribute or have like a communication with the platform, right? Like that level of communication just may be unnecessary and provide more confusion. So I like the idea of like there can be intentional adoption or intentional interfacing, whatever. I think I have trouble with the extensibility concept because again, an organization it may not even make much sense for it to like be something like the platform to be very like extensible. So you kind of have like levels to the extensibility. I find it a bit tricky. I think having it kind of compartmentalized within something like support or interface or investment. I really liked that kind of train of thought, even though you don't necessarily hit like some more of the components of what extensibility could look like. I think if we're thinking about just like levels and trying to keep it a bit more broad, so that it doesn't really matter what kind of organization or what the intention is with the platform, you can kind of fit somewhere into this. Yeah, hopefully that concept made sense.
I like the category itself, and I think it's unique, and it could potentially fit into many of the other things, or play into them at least. But I think I like the idea of having it. I think it makes sense in form of like a close and limited. You at one point started writing inner source,
Yeah.
which
But then I caught myself and was like, stop using techniques. We want to talk about outcomes.
Yeah,
And
but
so that's why I
but
stopped myself.
yeah, but I kind of want to get that through without actually writing inner source. It is because inner source doesn't necessarily mean anything other than that you're actively how to frame it, how you actively ensure that people are have the capabilities to influence across different teams and structures and product lines and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Things are open internally. And I guess at that point, so if, not with these words, but closed, limited, inner source, open source, kind of at that point makes sense because, or does it not?
No, I mean, like, look, I think there's a lot of, it's always the hardest bit is the words. So
Yeah,
I think
but besides the words, but like the idea, right?
I think the only thing that the reason why I did my little head thinking was I was thinking, is it fair to say that that it would be that a company would be optimized when their internal platform is open source? I'm
Yes,
not sure.
that is not what I mean, and I
Okay.
think that is one of the things that kind of we discussed this before, that no one necessarily has to get to level 4 in certain aspects if it's not within what the organization. It's not like if you get everything to 4, you won the game, right? I would say for extensibility, the top level would be open source, because at that point anyone could consume and extend your platform, right?
What's striking to me is that the way you guys are describing it, there's maybe some similarity with the adoption column. Like, is part of adoption at a certain point inner source that people are contributing to?
And that is what I mean by it. Sometimes you have a specific thought. For instance, extensibility kind of is a little bit investment, a little bit interface, a little bit adoption, and a little bit support. Like, it could be seen as something that's part of these other categories. Is it worth having that as a separate thing? I think it is, because I feel that if I think it's worth considering where you want to be at when you're creating a platform. Do you want it to be completely locked down? Do you want it to be do you want to give certain people certain options to extend into and out of your platform, etc.?
I like where the conversation is going, and I think what I found is it's hardest to do wordsmithing, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. That's exactly why we're here today, is to wordsmith. But it's hardest to do wordsmithing on the level words when we don't have like a concrete thing we're trying to achieve. And so I'd like to challenge and open the floor for anyone to suggest a like question that this row is trying to answer. So that first column, I think, can really ground us in like, why are we here? What are we talking about? And that way, hopefully the words will start to like be able to be compared back to that and say like that. So if anyone has any ideas on what to write there, that would be super helpful.
Actually, what I want to say is that I'm like, I don't think that extensibility should be counted as a maturity level. It's a character. I see this more as a characteristic of the platform rather than like a maturity level that we need to categorize. It totally makes sense as I think as Robert mentioned, it totally makes sense to different organizations, different customers, different users to have a closed platform, to have a plugin driven platform, we have an API driven platform, whatever we call it. But even though you're not supposed to get to the level 4, usually maturity models are, you know, organization that reads them and especially like management leadership teams are targeting like the 4 level is like we call it optimized, like right, like level 4 is the optimized one, the top column. Like I would want to be optimized on any aspect.
And that's kind of where you get into the, if we put it in here and say we are ranking, you know, what is the best. If there's a category where there's not really like a clear, like there might be some discussions on certain topics, but if it's not clear that you know, when you're starting out, you're kind of starting out at level 1 and you want to get to level 4 as much as possible within your context. If you can't say that, I feel I feel that extensibility is really important in a platform, but it's important for the people who are creating the platform to determine in what capabilities they want their extensibility to be, and is not necessarily something you mature into.
Yeah, exactly.
If that makes sense.
That's exactly. I think you rephrased my point.
I can definitely see both sides of this coin, in that I think that there is a maturity around building a platform that is capable of extension by others, and a platform which is like written in such a way that nobody can touch it other than the like main kind of owners of it. So I definitely can see an argument for that, and that's where I find that the words that VJ first suggested around closed, limited, plugin, and ecosystem is really powerful words, because I think plugin indicates like it's almost like an addition on limited, though, to be fair. Like, so I can basically, I'm going back and forth in my own head. So one thing we said we'd try and do today is that we would try and bring use cases and apply it to the model and see if we feel like the use case is captured by the model or not, or if there's aspects of that use case that are not captured or whatever. And so given, thank you whoever added the question, I think that helps a lot, and that leaves us in a state where I think we might be in a good place. If anyone wants to throw out, ramble for a minute about their use case and where they would see it fall on this table, and whether or not it works for them, this might be a good time for us to be like, to take a use case, run it through this table, and decide, does adding a line, understanding it's not yet wordsmithed, but adding a line around that extensibility idea, or that how do you add features idea, would help or hurt your evaluation, like the effectiveness of your evaluation with the model. This might be a good time to do that. So I don't know if anyone had one in mind that they wanted to use.
Yeah, like, but now that I read how are new features, capabilities added to the platform, how is it different? It sounds to me like a rephrase of the first line. How the platform engineer will get prioritized and financed. So get the finance out, how you get prioritized.
Or you could put it into support, like how
I think it breaks, yeah, it breaks
so,
into, like the extensibility part breaks into different aspects. We call them aspects, so different aspects or different roles in what we already have. Also, a plugin driven and developer ecosystem, I read it as similar to self-service solutions and API contracts, so the interface one.
Okay, so.
And limited is a supported solutions. Like I can, and I can argue that I can extend, like, you know, we developers know best. And even if something has no API, I can wrap it up with my own bash script and create an API on top of it, and I will carve my way to get this done. So even if it's closed, I make it open, like quote unquote open, and bypass completely the service that the platforms provide to me.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what my point is, that it's not necessarily that extensibility is not important, but I feel that that's kind of like the sum. It is something that it's based on these different aspects of the platform. But yeah, I think I'm right now. I'm just repeating myself because it's late, so I'll stop talking.
I would also agree to what Tashi just mentioned. Maybe all the parameters that we see here in terms of closed, limited, plugin-driven developer ecosystem are more about how the platform should be. Maybe like we discussed earlier, maybe that's the characteristic of how the platform should be, or it should behave. So again, I feel it fits better in the interface row. Maybe we might have to brainstorm a little, probably see if there is a better word than interface. That probably defines how the platform should be. So when any organization is, let's say, building a platform, so they know that okay, when I'm at the provisional level, this is what or how my platform should be, and then they can eventually progress to a level which says, we have a full developer ecosystem, or like I mentioned in the document as well, that inner sourcing is done so that people are contributing and building it. So in my head, I would probably spend more time figuring out probably a better word for interface, and then take everything that we have currently for extensibility and put it in the other row, and even replace like plugin driven with self-service solutions and things like that.
Yeah. So I find it really powerful that we're talking about this as a possible additional aspect, because it's helping us drive out deeper understandings. And so I've started this section at the bottom around the notes for things we want to capture when it comes to details. And this is where I think that the more we can talk about like people's experiences, concrete experiences, and apply it to this, the more we might drive out those, like, this is where I see this part of my experience as a platform engineer on a platform team somewhere, like, being represented in this table or not represented in this table. And we can drive out some more things and kind of take notes of things that we find really important to make sure get captured when we get to the detailed section. And again, whether or not we change the word of interface, whether or not we change extensibility, these will start, I think, becoming clearer as we drive out examples. So like, as an example, I've switched jobs, so I'm at a new job now, but a year ago, I was at a company where I was on a platform engineering team of 2 people. It was a small organization, so kind of startup oriented. So we were we were sort of an operationalized investment, as in we had a team, but it was not a large proportion of our organization. We didn't have any product-oriented people on the team. We only had engineers. And the engineers tried to have a product mindset, but like, the organization wasn't investing in the product side of things. It was that the team was investing in that, not the org wasn't supporting that side of things. And like, work around that platform really got prioritized by things that needed to get done for the org. So we did a lot of things around like PCI compliance and things along those lines. So I think those are reinforcing to me that it was like a cost center of like, solve this problem that the business has, like, prioritize, rather than like think about the larger kind of experience of the developers and those kinds of things. So when we talked about adoption, the platform was pretty kind of, so like, we provided things like Terraform modules, and we in the end did have a CLI tool that people could use. And I would say it was very provider driven, in the sense that like, we didn't have to force anyone to use it. There was sort of one way to do things. So it sort of forced them to do it because it was the only way to do it. But we invested a fair amount of time and energy into like engaging people in how to do things that way, writing documentation, being available for office hours, things like that. So I would say that it was not a, you must use it, good luck, have fun. Like this wasn't a, like that kind of thing. It was more like it was us trying to say, here, you know, you have problems we're trying to solve for you with Terraform modules or a CLI tool or whatever, you know, let's collaborate on that. But most of the solutions were quite supported. Like it was a pull request system where people had to make a change in a Terraform repo. We had to approve them. We had to apply them. So self-service, we had one feature that was self-service, which was like a new feature as I was leaving the company that we introduced around developer environments, and a second one around secret version updates. But like basically we were sort of between operationalized and scaled, but if when it comes to the interface, but it was mostly, you know, supported solutions. It was all in code, but it was also our code. Like we had to support the engineers in doing it. When it came to supporting things that were running, that was us. We did all the upgrades of all the things. I would call it centrally tracked. We didn't have automation behind all these things. Like I was in the office on a Saturday doing an upgrade of the database, like, you know, things like that. But we also didn't have a fleet to manage. So this is a good example of where like I wouldn't have expected to get to scaled at the scale of our company. We had a database to upgrade. There's no point in doing fleet managed database upgrades when you have a database, like, or two, because we had staging and production, like not worth it, right? So that's okay. Like we were at level 2, but that's the right level for us at the time, I think. And when it came to measurement, we were quite ad hoc, if I'm honest. So we didn't really have much telemetry around things. We had telemetry around the security oriented things. So like when people were messing with secrets or something like that, but it wasn't about platform, it was about security. And we tried to do a couple of surveys, but they weren't at consistent intervals, and they weren't consistent questions. So I would call that quite ad hoc at the time. So then the question is so a question would be, would extensibility change my kind of self-evaluation of that platform or change my ability to evolve that platform to something better? And I would say that the thing that I am most drawn to wanting to talk about is the fact that like devs had to rely on us to merge their PRs and review their PRs in Terraform. And that was a pretty like annoying situation on both sides. And that I felt like came out quite naturally when it came to interface, as we've been talking about, like that's one of the areas. I would say one of the things that didn't come out in the conversation was around what happens if someone has to go off piste. So like we had some people who needed to use a different Google Cloud capability than we had previously wrapped up in kind of platform offerings. And we just spun them up in a GCP account and gave it to them and said, go have fun. Like this is a short-term spiky project. Like that's what you're going to do. So I guess that would be talking about like investment in new features. That was very like voluntary, temporary. I would call it temporary, as in like we gave them an account to go explore the thing, and if it was something that they needed in the end, it was going to fall under our purview to have to build it in like a kind of production ready way. But maybe that's where extensibility, like that conversation of like, should they have been able to build something that was more production ready and kind of report it back into the platform? I don't know. Like that's maybe somewhere where that would have a different aspect that focuses on it. Maybe you would have highlighted that. Not sure. Anyone else have any like questions about what I just spewed? Or did you find that process useful? Would it be useful for someone else to try that process on something that they're working on? I
think it's helpful. It's just, I don't know how to put that. It's just a lot of surface area that this topic in its nature covers. And so I think it's hard to like figure out, you know, what to focus on. Like it's good to have like a full narrative. But yeah, I think I had a hard time like kind of remembering like how to kind of keep this connected with what we're doing as well. And So that's kind of at least the challenge I ran into, but I do see the benefits of like, it was cool to kind of see like, wow, like the way that it does fit together. So I see kind of the pros and cons of having something like that.
Yeah, it was helpful to hear your story. I definitely am voting with everyone. Well, a lot of the sentiment that we should integrate into the adoption interface and support ones.
Cool. It's probably a strong enough like sway at this point. Like I think, as I say, I think it was a good conversation topic, but maybe it sounds to me like maybe I should remove the suggestions around extensibility row at this stage and return us back to the table in a state that we're all in agreement of, and then like again kind of raise any more questions. Maybe it comes back around or whatever.
I think it was very useful, especially since it kind of sort of revealed that, you know, no, this is absolutely something that needs to be part of what you're thinking when you're creating a platform. Like how does this work? And by going through that and thinking about it, we actually can find that extensibility is part of these different aspects. It is not necessarily explicitly out there saying like extensibility, but it is in there, which is good, because what we want to do is not to create like this long list about every single thing we can think of and have all these different levels. We want it to be concise and a little bit more to the point. So I think by bringing that up and we talking about it, I think we kind of find that extensibility is part of it, and it's in there. It's in the different aspects that we already have, which is good, which is great to find.
In the expansion, like the part underneath, we can explicitly say it's extensibility.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
and there's other things again where we're gonna create content based on the table, where we can start talking about some of the extensibility issues and kind of pinpoint them to different, varieties of scale between the different aspects and so on and so forth. So, it is something to keep in mind when we continue to work on the maturity model. But I'm happy to say that I feel that extensibility is part of the maturity model within the table itself. It's just not necessarily explicitly out there and just like in wording, but it's there, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you, and especially like that when I see broader picture of this table, and when we also consider a crisp, concise, and clear manner of communicating this kind of statement as a maturity model, I think we can hold on the conversation, and then we can explain that extensibility in the as a further extension of the table. That makes sense. But goody, I think I learned definitely a lot of perspectives from this, to be honest. Thanks, everyone.
This is why we have these open calls, right? this is the fun part. Everyone else just gets to read this thing. The fun part is building it. So yeah, cool. So all right. So anybody else have something that they feel like is like a burning thing they want to talk about? I have a couple prompt questions in my head, but I want to leave the floor open for this first. In that.
I could bring up something. I've been thinking about it, and I think I have an answer. But somebody had prompted me. I told them we were working on this paper and asked if they had any ideas and wanted to participate. And they said, "Well, I looked it over, and where's developer productivity? And is that is increased developer productivity? Should you expect that to increase as you go?" I don't. I'm thinking about that a little. I'm not saying it should be in there. I'm just sharing the thought. But what I've been thinking actually, just the past few minutes as I was going to tell you all about this, is that I think it is included in measurement. Like as you mature, you're going to measure things, and probably in column 3 or 4, hopefully one of the things if there is a way to measure developer productivity, we could talk about that, but that might be one of the measures you choose. So I guess I'm sharing the thought that someone shared with me, and then I'm sharing that I don't think it's another category, but I just wanted to put that out there.
And I think that is also one of those things where there's a specific thing that people often refer to, you know, in specifics, but by having these different aspects, you know, the sum again, the sum of it all is kind of towards that. You know, you would measure stuff to find that out, and by measuring it, you might discover that you need to have a different type of interface, etc. And that kind of just like makes it like moves everything forward, I think. So yes, I don't think that's it's a separate thing, but I think it's in there, unless, you know, okay, people are nodding, so good. I like it when people are nodding.
I've added that, like, that under measurement, we talk about the things that you have as goals for your platform. Not every company has dev productivity as a goal, right? But that is a very commonly discussed one today. But security, compliance, like cost savings, like these are things that are actually a lot of times the drivers of platforms. And devs like are like, productivity, and they're like, we don't care. We're talking about the millions we're saving by doing this, right? So you know, we live in sometimes we live in a fairy tale land where dev productivity is the most important thing, but actually it's okay if the platform is targeting a different outcome. That should be measurable, whether it be productivity or otherwise. So yeah, I think that's a great shout, Josh, that's
and I think personally you can find better dev productivity and within other things, like how fast you can get the code out, how, you know, how does the processes work, etc., etc., etc. And again, I feel all those things are within the maturity model.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Cool. What else have people had either thoughts about or been asked about or are worried about or?
I'm not worried at all. Everything's great.
I mean, if this is what's worrying you in your life, you're doing pretty okay, right? All right, well then a prompt question to see if we're doing things well, and to clear off some comments. We talked about the fact that there's sort of a point that platforms are inherently socio-technical, where on that socio and technical side of problem solving should this model sit? How balanced should it be, and whether or not it should shift towards one side or the other. Yeah, so do we feel comfortable with the balance on the socio-technical nature of building platforms? Do we feel comfortable with where the balance has landed in our current platform model?
Like the first thing that pops into my head, I feel yes. I feel that we have kind of covered both aspects good enough or well enough. Yeah, I don't know if anyone has any specific thoughts.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. I think you have to start somewhere ultimately, and I think as you get feedback from the community, I think it's time to iterate. But I think this is at least a good spot to spark a lot of good like dialogue and conversation. So yeah, I think where it is currently, I think is a good place to be.
Cool.
Because I mean, like we have the people stuff in here, the people things. We have some of the technical things and some of the collaboration things. You know, or you know, yeah, I feel like we kind of pretty straight in the middle there for like taking everything into account without, you know, yeah.
A lot of the more optimized ones kind of lend them, I can see pretty quickly how they might lend themselves to technical things like API contracts, community enabled contribution. So yeah, I think we're close.
But do we want to get rid of things that specifically go one way or the other, or is it okay? Because in some parts, some of the aspects are more or less just technical, and some of it is more or less just about the people and the processes. So I think we can allow ourselves to be more on the technical side on some aspects and more on the people side on other ones, because it makes more sense.
And the table balances, right?
Yes,
Like is the big
yeah,
thing.
the
Yeah.
overall picture is more balanced.
I just wanted to do for a personal gut check, because I haven't done this. One of the things that was raised previously was around the alignment with the cloud native maturity model. And we know that that's going to be evolving as over the next kind of couple of months or so, weeks, months, I'm not sure how long. But right now they break that down between people, process, policy, technology, and business outcomes. And I guess there's a question of like, do people, process, policy, technology, and business outcomes all get covered within this table in some way? Like, we're not breaking it down in quite the same way, but we're also a much more narrow topic. And so I think that's okay. But the fact that those things matter to cloud native organizations doesn't change. So have we tackled those? Is I guess maybe, Simon, I'm looking at you as well. I'm like, I'm comfortable that we aren't using those headers, but I would like to know that we feel like we're capturing those intentions. I don't know if you feel like that's a fair line to draw, and if you think that we are capturing them or not, if you have any opinions there.
I do actually. I think they are reflected in this. I'm very conscious of the scope and the different levels at which the two models work, and I feel that there's a good reflection in here. Yeah.
So I'm just gonna update that open question to a kind of intention that we have and close out the comment on there. I think that it's an intention and we've achieved that intention as of now, or like based on people's kind of thoughts right now. So that's cool. All right. I think another one that is maybe a good prompt is I've got the feedback that shared ownership is confusing. Well, that in general, this row is the most confusing row on the table, wording wise. It was the only confusing row on the table that I've gotten any feedback in the way of confusing on. So that's why I want to raise it and give it another set of eyes. I put detail about why I used the word shared ownership. That doesn't mean it's correct. I'm not trying to validate it. It's just that like it gives context in case people can think of a better way of describing that experience in that comment there. But does anyone else feel like this row has any confusions or any of the words in it they feel like could be more clearly articulated?
Yeah, and it is one of the more confusing ones for me, or not confusing, but it's one of those that I can kind of I'm not totally sure what I think about it. In some of these, again, it's kind of hard to pinpoint this is less mature than the other. It's harder for me to see how you cannot have shared ownership while also have centralized fleet management. For instance, like it kind of starts overlapping, and depending on your organization, you might choose a different path than what's kind of reflected here, which again kind of then for me, if it's not a very clear cut wording wise, this is where you kind of start and you want to try to move towards the right. It gets kind of confusing. Like, why would you want to be more mature in this case? In some cases, and this is one of the ones that I struggle a little bit with myself.
Is this really getting at like, so the right now the question is phrased that once a capability is in use, but maybe it's this, we kind of touched on this. Is it really about the entire life cycle of a capability? Like, what causes it to come into use? You know, how do you determine if it's meeting its goals? How do you determine if it needs upgrades or it's time to sunset it? Would that make it, you know, if we included the entire life cycle? Would that make it clearer?
I also feel the word shared ownership is a little problematic, as they say in books, right? Everybody's responsibility is nobody's responsibility, so to speak, right? So shared ownership kind of gives me that feeling. And I was reading this article on Martin Fowler's blog just last week, I guess, around twin topologies and what kind of models work, right? I think the mature models there seemed like where people collaborate. So even if you were to upgrade databases, for example, the dev team might as well participate in the upgrade of database, although it's not their kind of key activity from application point of view, right? So I would rather use the collaboration or some word around collaboration than ownership, because ownership somebody has to really own. You can't say everybody owns and then nobody owns, sort of.
I agree, and it becomes one of those things where just saying words collaboration is more mature in my head than shared responsibility, because or shared ownership, because at some point someone just decided that a couple of people are supposed to own this. That doesn't mean it's going to be well managed at all.
Yeah, I think
that might just make it more harder than having one person owning it and kind of steering the direction a little bit, while trying to get to something that's collaborative is kind of what we want. We want to collaborate on it, not necessarily have a lot of people having ownership to it. So yeah, I get what you're,
Yeah, I'd be curious if defined responsibilities helps at all. Like it may not, but the difference between shared and defined, I'm definitely hearing that shared is problematic, and I'm agreeing with that. Like the way you're describing that, I'm like, yeah, okay, I see where that could like be really misinterpreted. Yep, okay, cool. So definitely want to get rid of shared. And when it comes to ownership versus responsibility, right? I think that again, ownership sort of, you talked about collaboration, right? And that's okay to need to want to collaborate. Not only is it okay, it might be the most mature to want to collaborate on something, but there has to be a responsibility around it. Who is responsible for the success of something versus like owning it, like I have to do it by myself. And so I think both of those words are independently problematic, and even more together. But I'm very hesitant to go towards a level of being like a responsibility matrix, because a matrix is one implementation of this concept. And so, yeah, so does defined responsibility start to absorb some of the challenges that we had with the original wording? Like,
for me at least it does. Like just example wise, like a lot of different places, including the place that I'm at right now. The idea was that we don't have titles. Everyone just kind of chips in. So again, it's basically shared ownership. Everyone's involved. Everyone can vote. What happens then is, stuff barely moves forward. But as soon as you kind of go like, all right, this person is these persons now have the responsibility to take this project and kind of move it forward. And while everyone's still involved, someone has the responsibility to make sure that stuff is moving forward. It just basically like unclogs the entire system and starts getting stuff done, right? As soon as you go like, again, shared ownership just doesn't make sense in, I would say, all cases, but all cases I've been in, at least, where that has happened. So it might just be PTSD of that is speaking, but it's.
Something that's just been occurring to me is perhaps the concept of distributed responsibility as well. And I'm thinking about this in some ways because perhaps as we get that sort of more decentralized, perhaps if this is the direction of travel within the platform, there'll also be things like additional policy that might be in place, where there'll be an ownership of policy within an organization that might then be reflected in the platform. And I'm just thinking of it, there can often be multiple stakeholders within a platform as well, and maybe accounting for that may help as well. and distributed rather than defined is perhaps for me feels just a touch looser and sometimes a little more reflective of what I've observed. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
it's a
it for
really
me.
good point, Simon. I think my current thinking, my current preference would be to add that into the description rather than the table. And the reason why, and that doesn't need to stick there, I've just typed it there, we can delete it, we can move it, all the things, is that I think one of the things I was trying to capture from previous conversations and from previous experiences is this idea that like the platform creators and providers are in charge of drawing a line, right? They're in charge of defining like where the platform ends, how to use the platform, what's expected of the users, what's expected of the platform, and so forth. And I think when we talk about maturity, and Robert was raising it, one of the hardest parts about maturity models, we want it to actually be a progression and not just a, you could go in a bunch of different directions on this thing. I think not every organization would see decentralized or distributed responsibilities as success. But I think I would like to make, I'm going to currently make the assertion, and it may be wrong, but I think every organization would want there to be clarity on responsibility so that the platform is very obvious on who's in charge of patching the security patches up for this thing and who's in charge of that. And I think we can talk about in the details, like one version of this could be decentralizing things by exposing users to providing users of the platform the ability to manage the resources and thereby enabling them to or requiring them to be responsible for it. But others may want to centralize those, and that's okay, but that should be made clear by the platform at this stage.
I actually really like your train of thought and your approach. So thank you for the clarification, Abby. I actually, yep, agree. Thank you.
Cool. As a term to use could be decentralized as a way to capture when a platform exposes responsibility clearly to its users. Cool. Josh, I think I saw you typing away in there. Was there, or somebody was making some ideas brewing around the question around the support row. I don't, if anyone was doing
Yeah,
that, I want to hear
that
what
was
you're
me.
thinking and stuff. Yeah, cool.
I was just trying to reason about it, so I rephrased it to include adding, maintaining, and removing the capability. That was what I was suggesting, but I'm fine with, we could keep it that way. Yeah, that's. I wanted to bring up something else though, which is I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. The word fleet in the third column, centralized fleet management, is throwing me off slightly because is it really just about, are we talking about individual capabilities here? Do we mean capability management? And like, should I be in all four of these rows, should I be thinking about when I want a new capability or fix up a current capability, I have to make a request? That would be the first column. And the second one would be somewhere there's a sheet that says here they are, but nobody actually does anything. And then the third column, central management, means, is it about capability? That's the word fleet is kind of throwing me off. So
is it about having a platform team that is managing this, and then you move on to platform team facilitating other people to be part of the, because a fleet is a very specific thing. I think fleet is usually and depending on what you work with and where you work, fleet might mean something and it might not mean something. So having like centrally tracked, centralized management makes sense.
Yeah. I was gonna say, one of the things I'd like to capture, maybe this was the intention, and the intention can change, but I think what I'm hearing is definitely the words should change. The thing I wanted to capture was the difference between a sheet that is like, as you said, Josh, like a spreadsheet that you manage, like tick off as things get done, to like a click button kind of experience, or like a kind of like when you want to go through and when you want to update a API to introduce a new field option or to deprecate a field option, it's no longer like one by one you have to do the thing. It's more like we have a management process that is like, and I'm trying to stay away from the word automation in places, but like maybe this is one of those places where it's an okay word to use. So that was the intention of the box, and why I use the word fleet was to try and evoke that idea of like there are a lot of these things out in the world. Hopefully, like you're creating a platform because you're expecting many people to create things on your platform, and how do you then manage those many things? And I wanted that to evoke a sense of like those many can be managed as a singular thing versus those many have to be managed as like each individual thing. That was the emotion I was trying for.
I think if you remove fleet, that still means what you think it means. Again, it's not necessarily only about like the how it's structured, but also as someone that's not a native English speaker, like I can kind of see how someone like starts reading this and takes it literally.
Mhm.
Like, you know, are we supposed to manage stuff in fleets and so on and so forth? Centralized management makes sense if you're speaking about again having a specific platform team that manages the resources, so to speak, while the fine responsibility, like I'm not totally sure about the wording, but like the next maturity part would be not necessarily having the platform team being responsible for every single part, but share the responsibilities with the other people through, you know, facilitating that the platform itself is capable of giving them the option of doing that, which is very mature compared to them just managing the resources, right?
And the clarity, right? Like I think that, like, so I would definitely say there are organizations that give the responsibility and the ability to upgrade their stuff to the users, but like no one quite knows that they're supposed to do it, so you're just sitting on version whatever of whatever, and like you have no idea the security things, and that's where you're probably living in a world of either by request and requirement that this stuff is actually being updated, or possibly by centrally tracked, as in like there's someone poking you being like, your thing has a security error, fix it, you know, kind of thing.
Yes,
So
or you could poll occasionally. Let me check the latest up, you know, announcements that I need to.
exactly.
Yeah. And then central management means there's a team that's responsible that will kind of push base, make sure that it happens. Is that?
I think in both of these, look, it's all opinion. We'll have to see how it goes with details. But my current feeling is that for both of these, it's a centralized team is in charge of it, or that there'd be a centralized like function that's in charge of it, and it's just a matter of how that function treats it. Do they treat it as like one-offs, or does it treat it as like a category of things that can be managed together, and progress together in a more like sustainable way, right? Because this is because remembering why we have these two columns, like what is operationalized, like if you at least know that you've got VMs that have Heartbleed on them, like you're operational, right? Like you may not be fast at fixing them, but like you know where they are, you know how to get to them, and you will get to them, right? But like you can only do that when you've got so many things to be done, until you've got to get to a scaled version of this, which means that like you've got an Ansible setup or a Terraform setup or something set up where you can like push out these like updates. So that's what I'm thinking about my experience with like security patches, and like how do I track that, or end of life of a resource that we're using? Like how do I make sure no one is sitting on such an old version of Postgres that like we're putting our data at risk or whatever, right? Like that's what I'm thinking about when I'm in this world or in this row.
Does it come down to prioritization a little? Like in the second row, you have no way to prioritize. It's just whatever is at the top of the grab bag here, whatever I happen to pick up. In the third row, it's like, no, there's a team here and they're sitting down and saying, well, we better address these CVEs first.
When you say
Row
row, do you
or
mean
column?
the columns?
I meant the support. Yeah, the
Yeah, from
support column, like
operations,
2 is more like just a grab bag of stuff that we pick up randomly, and 3, I'm not saying we should write this in, but I'm just trying to make sure I understand what you're saying. And 3 would be, no, we work together and we choose what's most important and we do that work. And
I think I would push those both back down one level personally. So grab bag is sort of this by request requirement. Like someone runs around with fire coming out their head being like, oh my God, I just found out we have something running that is end of life, go fix it. And so therefore it has to be fixed, and doesn't matter. Nothing, it's actually quite intentional here that we don't talk about who's in charge of fixing it until the most mature level. It might be a software team that's in charge of fixing it. It might be a platform team. Like we aren't like, we're not, I don't believe that we should tell a company they're mature or not mature based on who they assign to different types of projects. Like the key is like, does the thing get done? And like at the provisional level, you're sort of like, it gets done when someone realizes it needs to get done. And some teams might be, some teams within an organization might be more quite mature with that process. They might have like patching Fridays where every Friday they look for things they have to patch. But another team in that organization is like, what do you mean I have to patch this thing that's 5 years old? Like, you know, and that would be quite provisional. It's like sort of by request and requirement as defined by anybody ad hocly in the org. Versus when we get to operationalize, that's what I'm hearing from you, Josh, on that idea of like, there is a list and we're working our way down it and we understand what we need to do, but we're working our way down in a fairly like point by point kind of world, like where everything's a little bit special. And then you get to managed, centralized managed, and now all of a sudden you can say databases, they're all the same to me. I can treat all my databases as like they all need to be patched or they all need to be upgraded. And there might be a really mature rollout system and there might be health checks. And like, again, I'm not saying like what good looks like in the really kind of minutia of like how someone does it, but it's about being like, databases are a thing and I can manage them, not Joe Schmo's database and Sarah Schmo's database over there and whatever I have to treat as different things on a checklist to validate they've been done, you know?
yeah, I see what you're saying. The third column puts a little bit of conventionality and consistency.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wanna raise 2 things. Like one is on the optimized one. I know we had shared ownership, now we have defined responsibility, and if I remember correctly, like 2 meetings ago, I proposed the shared responsibility one, which is kind of what you like. This is what I heard you saying. Like there's a responsibility lying in the platform teams, responsibility lying in the user, and there's like a distinction between who owns what or who responsible of what. So one proposal is to have like shared responsibility here in the fourth one. But on the overall, I don't know if, again, maybe I'll use Robert's claim or what he said earlier about non-English speaker. To me, support, or at least a support function in the tech industry, sounds like a support, like someone that does the support, like someone I can call to and ask for help, which doesn't really read or align to what, at least the way I got it, not really aligned with what we said up until now. And we even call it like day 2, with day 2 in the third column, we call it like should tackle the hard problem of day 2, and day 2 is day 2 operations. So I don't know if operations is like, because operationalized will be kind of tricky to cover. Like,
So I think there's 2 things there, and I think one of them we can knock off fairly quickly so that we can get into the harder one, which is naming the row. So the first thing I heard you say was shared responsibility was your original suggestion like 2 weeks ago. I bastardized it as shared ownership, which was raised as a concern. And we've now landed on defined responsibility. So what I've done is I agree with you that the term you used, which was shared responsibility, came from your background as a cloud provider, or like in the cloud provider world, where there's a shared responsibility matrix. That's also what I was thinking of. And so so I've captured here for the detailed section that we want to make sure that when we come to that optimized detail section, that we talk about that as an implementation of this. And I think that where we were was that like shared vote when written as only 2 words, using the word shared gives people heebie-jeebies around like, but who owns it? If no one owns it, or if everyone owns it, no one owns it. And so by using defined, that's the outcome we want. And the implementation that we could use to achieve that outcome would be a shared responsibility matrix, which we can write in more words in the detailed section. Does that capture your intention? Okay, cool. So that one I thought we captured well, but I wanted to validate. So then the second point, let's open that floor, which is does support. So first of all, I'm going to close off Fleet because I think we've agreed that Fleet doesn't make sense there. We've talked about it. So talking about the row category title, we currently have it as support. Operations has been suggested. How do people feel about what word we should use there?
My vote would be operations.
But the maintainability is a big word to use.
That was my thought too. I was like maintenance, but operations is probably a better way to say it.
I think I mentioned before operations as well on this particular, and it might just because I'm kind of in operations, but this kind of is like the definition of the word operation for me. Like all the other things are, some of it is how you interact with it, some is how you measure, you know, how you and what your what kind of backup you get from the people, how the users are using it, so on and so forth. And then you have the operation part of it left. So it kind of just makes sense as operation. Maintenance, I think that's one aspect of operations in my head. If you're putting in maintenance into it, that is for me as something that could be part of it. Part of operations might not be necessarily maintenance, but everything from architecture and you know, taking some of the strategies and et cetera, you know, I feel that operations kind of is an easier word to use for an aspect, and maintenance and so on and so forth is also part of the maturity as you go along. So I feel it kind of like just makes sense to have it as operations, and then maintenance is just part of the journey.
Yeah.
Delivery. Oh,
Sorry.
that's okay. Now I gave away my. I was gonna say delivery is another word that comes to mind for me a little. People kind of conflate delivery with operations a little bit, like app delivery is the name of the tag. Yeah, maybe that's too obscure. I'm still leading to operations too. Okay, Simon, go.
Yeah, my thought on operations is that I see, perhaps with my background, I see maintenance as being a part of operations. It's a subset of the activities that take place within it. And the challenge I see with support is that support is when something breaks. It's probably spending too much time around ITIL for my own good. And on the delivery side as well, for me that feels a bit like part of almost a release process as well, and it's touching on a process for delivery of software or platforms, for example. And I like operations because it fits absolutely squarely with running, maintaining, and supporting a platform at any point in time, regardless of the life cycle of anything within it, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Cool. So I think that's quite a strong argument for operations being the right word for the row, but maintenance being an important aspect of what we talk about within the descriptions. Like that's what I'm just hearing kind of across the board, really. So I'm gonna go with that. So I've captured that down below. Cool. So we are what 80 minutes in. And the goal, just to reiterate, the goal of today is for us to be comfortable that this is a fairly stable table. Now, that doesn't mean that nobody can ever question it again, and this is what we're publishing, but it means that we're comfortable that people spend time and energy writing longer descriptions, and that we're not going to end up blowing up, hours of people's time with these longer descriptions by completely rewriting the table. That's sort of the level of completeness we want to be at, right? Words changing here and there may or may not happen. So I'll rehash that question and say, how do people feel? Do people feel like this is in a place where they feel like it's stable and they're comfortable with people spending time on the detailed sections, which of course are going to need their own review sections and all that stuff. But yeah, are we comfortable with people moving on to details?
I really like the words that we now have for the different aspects. I think that's pretty much clear now that we changed from support. And the overall theme is at least correct enough for someone to be able to kind of deep dive into topics and write a little bit about it. So yes, I think we're at a place where we can shift a little bit from the table itself into more of the stuff around the table.
One thing I didn't hear you explicitly mention, and maybe it was implicitly in your point, is I think we had a lot of conversation about whether or not, and if we did, how we would define the different levels as words. Like, I think if we have these words and these words with high confidence and these like intentions behind the aspects, then we're in a really good spot, because as we go driving through the details, I think that will identify if any of the different levels within an aspect are wrong, right? Because as we're writing the details, we're like, oh man, this is broken. Like, I really wanted to be able to write about this at the operationalized level, and like, it just doesn't fit. It needs to, so we need to rethink, how we categorize operations or an operationalized platform at this level or whatever, right?
Yeah,
So, yeah.
I think, and I think those work as well. Like at least in my head, but I might, I've been staring at this for a while.
You're telling me.
Yeah. So for me, it seems that you could argue that the next level is a progression from the previous level, just wording wise. I think it's fair to have it to be like a little bit open, so that we not necessarily like pin it and say that these are the names, but I think they make sense, and we might have some sort of genius moment at some point and change something, but it would still make sense. Yeah, I think so, at least.
Cool. Who else?
Everyone else agrees.
Yeah.
That's just how it is.
That's what I'm going to take it as if no one else disagrees. But I'd love to also hear agreement, just like, even if it's just a thumbs up or whatever, like if you're like, yeah, I got nothing else to add. So cool.
This is the first time I've seen the top row, and yeah, I like it. The provisional, operationalized, scaled, optimized. Yeah, that
Awesome.
makes a lot of sense.
It's a good top.
Gives
Yeah.
some clarity.
Yeah, it took a bit of time to get there, didn't it? Awesome. All right, so I'm going to propose that we're at a stage where I could create some GitHub issues, one per row of this table. So this is my proposed next steps are: copy this table other than this column, which was just there for a little bit more detail when reviewing. paste that in here instead of the current table that's in here. Delete the current model details that are below because those are no longer valid because it's no longer the model that it was referring to. But create instead a detailed section, for the current model, the one that we're agreeing on here, and create GitHub issues for each of those so that we can have an owner who can hopefully drive through the language within those. And obviously the owners are going to have some level of collaboration because language used, style of writing, those kind of things are going to have to get kind of emergently defined as we go. But so that's my current kind of process for thinking about what comes next. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to propose that we take action on or propose that we do in the next half an hour that we have available?
One thing that comes to mind for me, and maybe these ones in the column that you have highlighted here will help with that, is that it can be nice to have a rudimentary something for someone to start with that the deeper dive. We might end up diverging significantly if we don't. So I guess I just wanted to put that out. Do we think that what's in the columns now is enough for that, or how do we make sure we're starting from kind of a similar place?
I think that's a really fair statement. So I've added this idea of capturing a general format. And I think that's something that we could potentially spend a few minutes on here of like, what do we expect good would look like, in the sense that, like, as an example, the detailed section in the original format, each level was allocated 2 to 3 sentences. Is that sort of the scale we want to go with, or are we looking at, longer than that? In the detailed section, there was no extra color written about the aspect itself. It was only written about each level of the aspect. Is that the general format that we want to go with, or do we want to add a paragraph of detail about the aspect itself, like in the value behind the aspect? And then the third thing I thought about when looking at these is around basically like how concrete we get. Like, is this where we start talking about specific practices, like the responsibility matrix and things like that? And how specific do we get? And do we want to link, like, reference blog posts or case studies that like are publicly available and therefore can be like, see, and for example, this discussion here or whatever? Like, yeah, how detailed, how specific do we want to get? So those are just some ideas I'm thinking about. Josh, I think I saw you hand raise.
Yeah, I was thinking, first of all, I like the idea of having at least a paragraph kind of describing, and that might be the stuff in this column that's there, or that's at least the start of it. And then maybe like a sentence or two, like maybe we start small, like you kind of did here, and that makes sure we have relative consensus, and then we can expand from there. I don't know. I like the idea of keeping it small to begin with. A paragraph and a sentence or two about each line.
I'm trying to figure out what I think about it, and I think I'm okay with everything, which is great, which is of great help for everyone else. But yeah.
Well, if we kind of leave it too open and people start referring to this and that and the other, it might, that might lead to divergence or a lot of stuff we have to bring back in, like, oh, we didn't want those references, or if we can.
I feel that I'm slightly biased because of being part of the GitOps principles and how that's kind of written and how like concise and to the point it is, and then you can explore it later on what that actually means. But we had 4 principles with basically a sentence each, and we spent like probably around 10 to 20 hours per principle getting it to that point where it kind of just makes sense from that little sentence. And I don't want us to do that necessarily, especially since this is a different scope. This is not something that, like, yes, you want the maturity model to be fit on a slide, yes, but it doesn't have to be those like really concise guiding principles in that aspect. So, you know, we have more to work with here. So I would, as always, like caution that we not to go overboard with anything. Try to make it as easily digestible as, you know, for someone like me who have ADHD. Seeing a wall of text doesn't really help me. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm hearing a little bit of like tension there on like, it's really hard to be concise. There's that quote. It's like, I would have written you a shorter letter if I had more time, you know, like kind of thing. And then, but at the same time, like by not putting in the time to be concise, you can potentially lose readers and lose readability and that kind of thing. So like, I think that is a natural tension. I think one thing I would call out is that as an example, the piece of work that we're going to kick off shortly that's being driven by Michael around the like platform as a product deep dive paper is where I see us going, where I see a way of us moving forward beyond the maturity model, in that like we talk about techniques within the maturity model detailed section, but those techniques are not going to be described. Like we're going to just say platform as a project is a great way of thinking about things. Moving on, right? But like, whoa,
Yeah.
whoa, that's a lot to talk about. Okay, like,
Yeah.
and then there can be a deep dive on that technique or on that like practice, right?
I think from that perspective, we could spend a little bit of time to try to get the maturity model to be not necessarily to deep dive into specific topics, but make it easy to digest and understand what we mean with these levels and so on and so forth. While any one of these aspects could be, you know, something that fuels another one of those projects. Maybe something more technical about how to create, you know, the self-service solutions and so on. So, like, there's stuff that can come out of the maturity model and then be, you know, referencing back to the maturity model and say, like, we're exploring this aspect. If you're around these parts of the maturity model, you know, this thing is for you. And that's where we can kind of deep dive into more specifics, I would say.
Yeah, I'm going to write a statement and you can tell me if you agree with it. The statement I'm going to write is, it's okay and even expected that some of the things discussed will be only mentioned and could benefit from a much deeper dive. This is out of scope for this paper and is an opportunity to add a GitHub issue to track a deep dive paper on the subject.
I feel that that's right. Like, that doesn't mean it's right, but I feel that that's right. It's the same as where someone asks, you know, I'm looking into this thing, can you help me a little bit? And then you kind of go into, oh, let me explain the 200-year history up until this point, so you understand everything about this, while you just kind of want your answer to your question, so to speak. Not that this is that, but that's kind of a similar thing where the maturity model, while it's gonna be, it's not an easy digestible thing, but we could at least try to make it easy to understand for you know, stupid people like me. So we can look at it and kind of go like, oh yeah, this makes sense, and you don't have to look into like 72 pages of stuff to understand what the meaning behind this is, right? So, but there's always a trade-off at some point. But
Definitely. Okay. So I'll leave a little bit of airspace on these general format things. I agree, Josh, giving like a complete blank slate is just setting people up for disappointment. Because if they write something amazing, but it diverges significantly from how someone else has written, we're gonna have to converge and people might be disappointed with that. So by getting these in place. So does anyone have anything else if they were to pick up a aspect, I'm not saying you have to, but if you were to pick up an aspect, you wish you would know up front so that you could be more successful with it?
Yeah, for me, like if I had to write in one of the row, by following these 5 guidelines, I think we should be able to at least come with a consistent data points.
Thank you. Okay, so then, so I believe we're getting to the point of wrapping up. The one thing that's on my mind, or I have a curiosity around, and maybe you all can help me with it before we get off the phone here, is we had in the original paper a very loose sort of timeline as an idea of trying to get to publication for Chicago. The reason being is that we had, I think, great success at publishing before Amsterdam. The white paper, it gave us a platform to have a conversation. We've seen a huge uptick in the number of people getting involved in the working group. And I think that that's because there was something to like tangibly grab onto at Amsterdam and have a conversation about. And I think this has the potential to do that as well coming into Chicago. But that doesn't mean we want to put out something we're not proud of just because, you know, deadlines, you know, it isn't Black Friday or something where it's like the one day for retail here, right? So if we want to try and hit that deadline, the soft timelines mean that we need to have reasonably confident, so similar level of confidence as we currently have for the table, reasonable confidence in the descriptions and the details by September 10th, which would give us a month to have deeper confidence in that, right? We'd still have a month of review at that point in order to gain deep confidence in that, so that we then would still have a month to be able to manage images, publication, promotion, etc., like we did for Amsterdam. So this is following the same kind of timeline. So what that means is that it would give us 1 month to get detailed sections for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 aspects in a stage where we are like, yeah, this feels like a thing we could put in GitHub and edit only via pull requests from now on. Does that seem like something we can do? Does that seem like a target we want to be still aiming for? How do people feel?
I'm up for it.
Yeah. All right, VJ, which one are you taking on?
Choose now.
Yeah.
No,
all 5, right? You said you're
yeah.
up for it. You're gonna just
Yeah.
get them all over.
Even if you see my blogs that I was already writing in Medium for last 5 months, and I'm already in it, like but in different
Cool.
way. But I know now I am at the right community at the right place. So now I can take anything that you assign to me.
Amazing.
I think I feel that having that as a deadline is good. At the same time, I also feel that we don't necessarily have to, you know, we have to finish it, but it doesn't necessarily have to be all the final wording and stuff like that. Like if it goes, you know, people don't have time or something happens or something like that, it's not the end of the world. But I think I would agree just the level of feedback on the platform's white paper and everything that happened around that, and you know, being in Amsterdam, talking to people about that, and literally like talking to people even, you know, in Norway at customers, and they start referencing that, and I kind of go, okay, well, by the way, you know, having something to kind of like point to that we all worked against, like it's a good deadline, because you know it's perfect to get ready for QCon. If it's doable, I think it is if we have enough people. And like I'm really bad at writing. You don't want me to write anything. I'll spend like 2 hours writing 3 words. Like you know, I have to everything has to be perfect straight out, so that doesn't work. But you know, some of us might jump into several of these aspects and kind of look at what people are doing and try to, you know, be that liaison type ordeal and stuff like that. I think we can do it if we just have enough people involved.
Cool. Thanks for sharing.
I can, unfortunately, I'll be on PTO for 2.5 weeks out of this 1 month, but starting next Thursday. So as much as I wanted to try and lead something, I don't think it will be fair. But I'll try as much as I can to contribute by end of next Thursday. One question for the audience, like, and I'm new to like this community or any other CNCF community. Do we want to track the wording in GitHub issue, or just the progression? Like Word docs is much more collaborative than GitHub issue to
Yeah,
have it.
I think you're spot on. I think my intention is to put an issue in and link it to the GitHub doc. So yeah, yeah, big thumbs up on that for sure. Yeah, that's been working really well for us. So that's why I said that our goal is to get to a point where we're comfortable with it
Okay.
being
Okay.
stable enough it can become a GitHub pull requested thing. Because basically, if you're putting it into pull requests, like into GitHub, you want it to be tractable when it comes to a pull request and people making changes and stuff. And I don't think we're at that stage yet for the
Yeah.
detailed section. So
That's
yeah,
our
cool.
goal for September, mid-September.
Exactly. September 10th, yeah, ish. But yeah, Sai, if like you have a topic here that you're particularly passionate about and you feel like you could interface, if you feel like you could get a draft out by the time you leave on vacation and that's not overly pressing on you, in my opinion, that'd be a huge, awesome benefit. The one risk it has is that people read it and aren't sure what you intended. So like obviously you'd have to have a little bit of flexibility with people, like, you know, not sometimes tearing apart things and not realizing why while you're on vacation, but we wouldn't be finishing it until at least a week or two after you came back. So we would still be able to incorporate your vision again on the backside. So cool. I'm gonna make a note of that here, and then I'll add you when it comes to GitHub into that section as one of the people, and more people can join in, right? This isn't a one person show. But yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I would like to take the measurement and I want to contribute there. And if others can also, but I feel excited about it that both columns are rows together.
That was the one we had the hardest time finding some. Oh, so I just typed measurement as, what did I just do? That was when we had the hardest time finding people to take on during the white paper. So I love having somebody who's excited about it. That was the one that was like difficult to figure out how to quite capture. So that's great. Thanks, Vijay.
But going back to the GitHub, like, is it a I again, you know, define responsibility. Is it not a good idea just to have an investment adoption interface operations measurements issues and then kind of tagging these people? That doesn't necessarily mean that the wording has to be done in GitHub. It doesn't mean that like it's going to go back to a shared docs anyway, where people can see what's happening and see what other people are writing, and to kind of get the gist of how this can be worded and formatted. But at least having something that's visually say like, this is what we're working on, and this is the person that's responsible, and then people can say like, I want to help, and then they can contact like through Slack or whatever. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. That's the plan. So like it's just going to help me make sure that I get the right people with the right Google handles in as editors of the document, and then go from there basically. So yeah. All right. Josh and Simon, if either of you have a passion to grab one, let me know. You don't feel the pressure you have to just because you happen to be on this phone call.
Is adoption still up?
Yeah, adoption's still up.
You can adopt adoption if you want.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good one.
Don't worry, Simon. I know you're on like 18 different things. I just wanted to like make sure it was open, that it wasn't pressure.
Yeah, thank you. Operations catches my eye, but
you'll be a reviewer more than a writer. That's okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, no, that's awesome. The fact we have 3 out of 5 already with people that are really passionate about them, like we'll get the other 2 and we'll have reviewers, as Robert said, he'll be reviewing stuff, and like, yeah, so it's you're not, people who are owning things or responsible for things are not owning them. They're not the only person who's going to do it. There'll be lots of collaboration on it still. It's just it's good to get some words down. I find that that's what drives the conversation. You're like, what, that sentence? That's not what I thought we were going to talk about, and go that direction. So,
I am a yes man, unfortunately for myself. But if I take on anything more now, I will literally explode. Like
I'm not adding you. You told me that you're not good for writing. You'll be good for reviewing. So I'm not adding you. Don't worry.
I can barely read, but that's okay too. I have opinions on everything.
Definitely got you on the wordsmithing for sure. Cool. Then I'm gonna call it, I think, unless anybody else has something they want to talk about. I think we've achieved everything we were hoping to today, and we're in a really good spot. So yeah.
I have a couple of points. Number one, that I want to say thanks to Strand yesterday. He spent a good amount of close to 30 minutes to 45 minutes giving me an entire view of Cloud Native Computing Foundation, all the contributions, how it works, and how excited. And I feel like it's a very good start for me as an onboarding engineer. And thanks for your help, Strand. And it's helpful.
It's I usually say, if you just put a penny on me, I'll start talking. Again, that's the ADHD. But I'm glad you find something useful out of it.
Definitely. So I felt comfortable, come prepared for today, and I started with that. That's where I came. The whole point of action, all the points came in because of the smooth transition I had, and also thanks for the team, the great work that have been done. A lot of this table is going to be helpful for even not only at what I'm contributing on, but for me also. It's a good learning in entire broader aspect of it as well. Thanks for putting the team together. Great job, everyone.
Thanks for the feedback, PJ. That's awesome. Yeah, Abby, thank you for running this meeting. This is great stuff. It's really coming together nicely. So excited.
We're getting there. It's good stuff. All right. Well, as you know, we're always in Slack. We'll be in the docs. I'll get the GitHub issues out at some point today, tomorrow, and get people attached. Thank you, Sai, for adding your email. I want to get you on ASAP because you have things to do, places to be. But yeah, we'll get that going, and I'll put it into Slack and all that. So thank you all for your time. I know these have not been short calls, but they've been, I think, extremely powerful, both for learning opportunity and for making this happen and getting it done. So thank you for spending the time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Abby.
All right.
Well, have a good one. Bye.
Okay.
See you soon.
Bye, y'all.
Bye, everyone.